All right, well, before we get into today's topic, I just wanted to point out this tweet from Truth's Table podcast. This is one of the wokest podcasts that's out there. Horrible. It's by three women who have no business teaching anybody anything. And the three women are Christina Edmondson. She is a very popular Big Eva speaker and wife of Micah Edmondson, another woke church advocate from the Presbyterian Church in America. Thanks a lot, PCA. It's got Michelle Higgins. She's the one who platformed an openly lesbian pastor, preacher, or something or other. So that's great. And then, of course, it's got that other lady. What's her name? Systematic Theology. What's her actual name? I forget, but she's the one that has the same exact beliefs as Nick Cannon regarding white people, how they're deficient, they rape, pillage, steal, all that kind of stuff. Just an open racist, another very popular Big Eva speaker. These women are absolutely insane. Even if the Bible did allow women to teach and exercise authority over a man, these would be not qualified for many other reasons because they have no freaking clue what they're talking about. But I thought this tweet was very interesting. So the whole point of the tweet is that they're showing how much their podcast has grown by sharing the impressive percentage numbers that have grown, and that's all fine. I have no problem with you sharing about your success. Not a problem for us. But I thought the tweet was very interesting. Let me read it to you. They say, "It's the growth for us. We are grateful for the global reach and expansion of Truth's Table." Truth, of course, is a Orwellian term when used in this context. She says, "Black women, thank you for sitting at the table with us. Black men and non-black women and men, we thank y'all for holding us down in the standing room section. Hashtag Truth's Table." These women are fantasizing about doing the very thing that James tells you not to do when he's describing the sin of partiality, like the same imagery, sitting at a table or standing at a table, getting the place of honor or not getting the place of honor. They're proudly celebrating imagery using the exact same example that James says is a very clear violation of God's law. These people are upside down. The woke church is evil to the freaking core. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about vaccines. Now, before I get into it, let me just say this. I am not an anti-vaxxer. It's just not who I am. It's just not what I believe. Now, I appreciate very much everybody who's continued to send me information about how vaccines are made and things of that nature. This experimental vaccine, this COVID-19 vaccine in particular, looks preposterous and just something that you would really not want anywhere near your body. It's untested. It was rushed. It's just, we just don't have the data that we need to know if it's even something that's worthwhile getting or if it might even cause harm. Even doctors are saying this. This is like a very experimental thing. And so why are you pushing this on people? But whatever. That's all a side issue. I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to get the COVID-19 vaccine. It's just completely unnecessary. I'm not going to get it. Obviously, I'm not going to get it. And I recommend that none of you get it as well. Not a doctor, but it just doesn't make any sense to get. Now, of course, though, Big Eva, in their Pharisaical mindset, wants to make this an obligation for Christians. It's a matter of loving your neighbor. If you love your neighbor, you'll put a mask on your face, obviously, even though you know it doesn't work. And likewise, if you love your neighbor, you will stick your arm with an experimental batch of chemicals in order to change your DNA sequences so that you can fight off the coronavirus effectively. Now, here is what this article says. This is an article by Matthew Arbo, Ben Mitchell, and Andrew Walker. This is horrendous. These are supposed to be ethics experts, and yet this is the quality that we're getting. Here's how it starts. It's not possible to properly love a person and act so as to unnecessarily jeopardize their health. Full stop. That is a false statement. It's not true. Because every time you get in your car and drive to the store instead of walk to the store, you are putting your neighbor's health in jeopardy. And you might say unnecessarily so. I mean, depending on how far the store is, it's within a half an hour walk. Why don't you just freaking walk instead of putting your neighbors at risk in a death trap that goes 60, 70 miles an hour with 10 feet of space between you and the oncoming car? Who knows? There might be even kids in that car. God forbid, there might be black people in that other car coming towards you. I mean, you're putting black lives at risk every time you get into your car, you wicked pagan. So this statement isn't even true, but let's just take it for face value and just see if we can follow this logic, okay? Let's start over. No more commentary, AD. Let's do this. It is not possible to properly love a person and act so as to unnecessarily jeopardize their health. If, by the minimal burden of wearing a mask, we can potentially protect others from grave illness, then it seems that we have a moral obligation to wear a mask. No commentary, Adam. No commentary. The same can be said for COVID-19 vaccinations. If by being vaccinated we can protect others from illness, then we have a corresponding obligation, given our Lord's command to love neighbors, to be vaccinated. Vaccinations not only protect me, but also protect other vulnerable members of society. Now, let's stop there. This is a disaster of logic. This you could drive trucks through the holes in the logic here. But I want you, before we even get into that, and maybe we won't even, because I think it's very obvious where this goes wrong. But let's just think about what is being said here. When the authors of this article, Andrew Walker, Ben Mitchell, and Matthew Arbo, connect vaccinations and masks with the command that the Lord gives you to love your neighbor, what they are doing is they are connecting it to the law of God, because love your neighbor as yourself is a summary of the law of God, at least the final 6 commandments of the law of God. And so they are saying, when they say you are obligated, a moral obligation, connected to the law of God to wear a mask and to be vaccinated according to this experimental vaccine that we just don't have any real data on. Even if we did, you still have to get it because Lord, love your neighbor as yourself. They are adding to the law of God requirements that they simply cannot do. This is Pharisaical to the core. Pharisaical to the core. Stick your arm with chemicals or you're breaking the law of God. That is what this article claims to say. Now, a couple people reached out to me and said, AD, you're not treating them fairly. This is an unnecessarily antagonistic response. No, it isn't. I mean, I read the quotation here, but here's what people pointed to. They said this. Hold on one second. They say this. They say, despite our own convictions about the rigorous protocols to ensure safety and efficacy, we believe that Christian liberty requires that each person be free to choose whether or not to receive these new vaccines. Well, that sounds pretty good. I mean, it sounds like a contradiction of the first article paragraph that I read in the article, but it sounds pretty good. Okay, Christian liberty, that's great. But the thing is, what they give with one hand, they take away with the other, because the very next sentence is, still, blanket appeals to Christian liberty are not sufficient. They require evidentiary substance. He says the libertarian-minded citizen who reflexively rejects any claim of authority has not adequately met the necessary threshold to refuse vaccination. That's false. You see, what they give with one hand, they take away with the other. They say, okay, you have Christian liberty, but you must prove that you've got good reason to reject it. No, Andrew, that's not how this works. You must prove that the Bible gives the church or the government authority to inject me or to make me wear a certain piece of clothing. You have to prove that. And before you do, I can just say no, and the answer, Andrew and Matthew and the other guy, is no. You have your sphere of authority, I have mine. If I just want to say no, and that's my God-given right. You can't just inject me with something because you want to and you claim that it's for my own good. That's not how this works. Stop being a Pharisee. You do not own me. My pastor does not own me. The government does not own me. If my pastor required that I get a certain piece of clothing in order to attend worship, or if my pastor required that I inject myself with a certain chemical in order to be clean for worship, I would leave the church. You don't have the right to add elements of worship. You don't have that right. It's just that simple. And so I don't have to be a doctor. I don't have to be an epidemiologist. I don't have to have any good reason to deny you the authority to inject me with chemicals. I can just say no. And if you don't think I can, you need to prove that I cannot. You need to prove that the church's or the government's authority extends over the ability to inject me with chemicals that they think are good for everybody else. If you can find that in the scripture, and I know you cannot, then I will change my mind. I'll apologize to you. But until then, you're a freaking Pharisee. Stop adding to the law of God. It's unbelievable that you're allowed to do this and none of your buddies call you out. Instead, they're just like, well, love your neighbor. No, that's not how this works. You don't get to decide what love your neighbor means. You don't get to add to the law of what love your neighbor means. I would argue this, that essentially what you're doing here is trying to bind the consciences of people while having the appearance of still being a Christian that's saved by the grace of God. You don't get to be a Pharisee and a Christian at the same time unless you reject the parts of your Phariseeism that you practice. You don't get to do that. That's legalism. You're trying to establish a sort of a hierarchy here. Now, there's another part of this article that says, well, you have an obligation, but, we're not saying that if you don't get it, that rises to the level of sin. Here's what it says. It says, because we believe that concerns about vaccinations do not rise to the threshold necessary to justify foregoing it, we believe that it is strongly morally advisable to get vaccinated. However, here's where they have their little weasel party. However, even if this rises to the level of a moral ought, that does not mean we think churches should discipline their members if they refuse to get vaccinated. Nor does it mean that an individual who forgoes the vaccine is necessarily sinning. I mean, with all due respect, this is complete nonsense. If you're tying an obligation to love your neighbor as yourself, you are tying it to the law of God. You see, even your Phariseeism is limp-wristed and weak and effeminate. Like, tell me what you actually believe. If you're tying it to the law of God, then it is a moral ought, it's an obligation, and to not do it is a sin. So you can't have it both ways. It's either love your neighbor as yourself or it isn't. And the reality is, all you've done here, even if I grant you this weird distinction between loving your neighbor as yourself, it's the law of God, but it's not like a law, even if I grant you this weaselly, limp-wristed, effeminate distinction, even if I grant it to you, what you're doing is you're setting up a system where you've got Christians and then you've got Christians. You've got this uber elite of Christians that do everything CNN requires of you because essentially that's your standard. To love your neighbor properly, just follow CNN. That's essentially what we're being told by Big Eva on a daily freaking basis. The thing is, like even if I grant you, you're setting up this hierarchy system that doesn't exist in the scriptures. The Pharisees did the same thing. Ben, Andrew, Matthew, stop being Pharisees. Stop being Pharisees. If you want to have this article where you strongly advise people to take an experimental batch of chemicals that nobody knows the long-term effects, and you want to say that it's the wise thing to do or something like that, fine. Okay, I'm okay with that. I've got a lot of things that I think are wise to do. For example, I think it's very wise right now to have at least a month's worth of food and supplies for your family on hand in case the stores are closed for a month. That's very wise. But what I will not say is that you're obligated to it based on loving your neighbor as yourself. I'm not allowed to do that in the scripture. Neither are you allowed to try to get people to try to twist people and manipulate people into injecting their body with chemicals that are of experimental nature that you have no freaking idea if they work or not. And even if you did, you'd be overstepping your bounds. Anyway, that's that. I'm fine. I think my blood pressure's fine. But anyway, I'll go for a run and everything will be okay. But guys, like this kind of article, it's so gross. I mean, these people should be laughed out of any room where they start to try to connect getting a shot with loving your neighbor as yourself, unless they're very sure And it's very obvious that they're not very sure, but they want to manipulate you. So what do? They say, love your neighbor as yourself. You don't know what you're actually saying when you say that. You can't tell me that you're not tying it to the law of God when you obviously are, unless you admit that you're using that term as a slogan, as a propaganda tool, as a manipulation. Big Eva, stop manipulating us. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. God bless. So riddle me this. What's the difference between this video?
They're acting out of a deficiency. So therefore, the only way that they can act is evil. The only way they have to rob, steal, rape, kill, and
fight or flight, okay,
in order to survive.
And this video.
And I pray to that end, because we have to understand something. Whiteness is wicked. It is wicked. It always means it's rooted in violence, it's rooted in theft, it's rooted in plunder, it's rooted in power, in privilege, which we just saw 2 weeks ago with the college scandal. So I mean, I have receipts here.
Evil. The only way they have to rob, steal, rape, kill, and
fight or flight, okay,
in order to survive.
It's rooted in theft, it's rooted in plunder, it's rooted in power and privilege.
Really think about it. Some of the words are slightly different, and I'm sure that they would have different ways of nuancing things to make it, you know, a little bit more palatable and all that kind of thing. But foundationally, fundamentally, these words are doing the same thing. The worldviews of Ekemini Uwan and Nick Cannon are very, very similar. And I think you got to ask yourself, if you are platforming a lot of these woke church people in your church and you're recommending their books and you're recommending their lectures and all of this kind of stuff, I think you should ask yourself, why is it that the people you're promoting so often sound like a raging racist like Nick Cannon? And why is Nick Cannon getting canceled, and yet the people that I criticize on my channel from the Christian perspective, why are you platforming them? I think it's time to take a good look in the mirror and to think about what is it that you're actually promoting. Do the things you say about white supremacy and white privilege and whiteness and all this kind of stuff, do they really come from the Bible, or did you get that from someone else that got it from really a pagan source? It's time to take a good look in the mirror, folks. And the question that I have for the woke church, are you going to own Nick Cannon? Because he sounds an awful lot like you guys do.